Aiden, come on up. And if you need a Bible, go ahead and raise your hand so that we can pass out a Bible to you as Aiden, opens the Word with us. And the book of Haggai. We need, hey, Greg, right here, Bible. Okay, praise the Lord. What is it? Oh, it's Habakkuk. We're in Habakkuk.
All right, now that everyone's figured out what book we're in, I'll give you about 3 seconds to find that. It's on page 1508, just in case you're wondering. I'll explain a bit about Habakkuk while you're doing that, because Habakkuk is not where it should be in the Bible, in my opinion. I can never find it on my own. I'll actually be going through all 3 chapters of Habakkuk today. And I have been through this before, and I just couldn't split it up whenever I've tried teaching this book. And the first time I taught it, the pastor asked me to teach a Sunday morning. And the hardest part for me about teaching is deciding what to teach. There's so much in it, and I just can't pick anything out. So I just asked him, okay, what do you want me to teach? So he just said Habakkuk. So then I went to go study and realized he wasn't very specific when he said Habakkuk. So, okay, so I just decided the whole book of Habakkuk, because it must have been what he meant if he wasn't specific. And then Sunday morning came around, and I was going up to teach, and he's like, what are you teaching? I'm like, Habakkuk? He said, okay, which chapter? I'm like, the whole thing. He's like, that's not what I meant. I'm like, it's much too late. I'm teaching the whole thing. But either way, I can't split it up anyway, so. And reason being is the whole thing's a conversation. It's just Habakkuk having a conversation with God. And to split that up, you'd either be cutting out what Habakkuk's saying or cut out what God is saying. And I think that just changes what you can take out of the book. So Habakkuk takes place, I had the date, but it's in my other notes. But it takes place in the last 2 chapters of 2 Kings. And what's happening during this time is, well, if you're reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, you see just king after king after king. Both the king and the people of both Israel and Judah are getting worse as people. They're falling away from God. They're making their own idols. And there's just evil happening in both Judah and Israel. And God reprimands them multiple times. He sends different people along the way to be like, hey, you guys are screwing up and you need to fix this. And they just keep on going down this spiritual decline. So then this is where Habakkuk takes place. And the thing I like about Habakkuk that sticks out to me against the other minor prophets is that the other prophets start with God picking out a person and saying, hey, take a look around you. Look at what's happening. I need you to do something about this. But Habakkuk starts with Habakkuk going to God because he sees what's going on around him. And the book starts with him praying to God, saying, we need help. And the book is God's response to Habakkuk crying out for help. So let's start reading, because there's a lot to go through, all 3 chapters here. It starts with the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore perverse judgment proceeds. This is what he's seeing around him in what is supposed to be a godly nation. And it sounds a lot like today, really, to me. The law is powerless. The good law is powerless. And justice doesn't go forth. People doing wicked things often get away with it for, like, let's say they got arrested in the wrong way and they get to walk away for it. Or just people doing stuff all the time. We see that all around our country, especially. And Just nothing's being done about it. And this is what he's seeing. He's seeing basically what we're looking at, just a bunch of evilness and spiritual decline, everyone falling away from God. But he's crying out to God, and he's saying, why aren't you doing anything about that? And I think a lot of us have prayed the same prayer to God. Maybe in a very open-ended way, looking at the country, saying, why are you letting this country fall, and you're not doing anything about it? Or maybe we have very specific reasons. Maybe someone wronged you, and you're like, God, why aren't you dealing with this? And as we read through the book, we'll see God's mindset in this matter and how he looks upon evil and how he deals with evil. So he cries out to God. And this is God's reply, starting in verse 5. Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, though it were told you. And I've seen this come up a couple times in the Bible, where people are questioning God, and God's response is so simple. It's just like, you wouldn't understand. I'm not going to bother telling you because you're not going to understand if I was to tell you what's actually going on. And he says, for I am raising up the Chaldeans. And this is Babylon. It's a part of the Babylonian nation, is the Chaldeans. And they're a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They're terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. They all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. They gather captives like sand. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They deride every stronghold, for they heap up earthen mounds and seize it. Then his mind changes, and he transgresses and commits offense, ascribing this power to his God. So he's talking about Babylon here. So he starts with his reply. God starts with, you wouldn't understand. But then he kind of just goes along with Habakkuk's request. And he's like, actually, I'll let you in on a bit of the secret here. So he explains that he's raising up Babylon. And Babylon at this time had just started as a nation that was known to be ruthless. Babylon had been around for a bit, but this is a point in time where they just were going around and they were conquering nations. They were taking everything they wanted, and they were known for being ruthless with the way they did it. They weren't like when you see how God instructs his people to take civilizations, it's somewhat in a peaceful way, unless he's using it as judgment, where he gives rules on how to treat the people and how to treat the animals and stuff. Babylon didn't care. They were just like, kill everybody, slaughter everything, burn it down, and then move on to the next person. So they were terrible. But God is telling Habakkuk, I'm going to raise these people up. And then we see Habakkuk's response to this. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O Rock, you have marked them for correction. You are of pure eyes to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? So what was it that God said just a couple verses ago? He would not understand. So God tells him a little bit of what's going on, and he immediately is like, it's not going to happen because you couldn't do this. It's not possible. And he's bringing up a couple good points in, say, a human viewpoint of they're worse than us. Why would you raise them up in order to judge someone like us who is clearly better than them? And he just doesn't understand. And that makes a bit of sense if you're thinking about it, like logically, I guess, as a human. And this is why God doesn't share his plans with us a lot of the time, is because our logic is very flawed and we're just not going to accept what God would tell us if he was to explain his plan. So in continuing in 14, why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook, they catch them in their net, and they gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice to their net, and they burn incense to their dragnet, because by them their share is sumptuous, and their food plentiful. They shall therefore empty their net, and continue to slay nations without pity. So he goes on explaining why he disagrees with God. So first he's like, it's not going to happen. And he's like, here's why. And he explains what they're doing is conquering nations and taking whatever they want, and they're pretty good at it. They're becoming very wealthy as a nation, and they're conquering other nations. And what do? While they're doing this is they give the power to their dragnet, in the fishing term that he's using, basically like catching fish and being like, oh, it was the net that gave me this fish. And in the way Habakkuk is seeing it is, say it was us. If we were to do this, you would judge us, right? If we were to conquer other nations and be like, oh, it was our power, or it was the idols that we have that gave us this power to conquer the nations. And just the last couple of weeks, we're with Cameron going through Gideon, and we see the same thing where God's telling the people different reasons of why he's not doing it a certain way. And one of the reasons is because you guys will say it's your power, it's your idols. And he's like, this is what these people are doing. So you're not gonna raise them up. And then he finishes his statement in the first couple verses of chapter 2 here. I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. So at least he has a bit of sense. He's going to try to correct God, but at least he's going to be like, I'm wrong, and I'm going to wait for you to correct me. That's basically what he's saying here. He's spoken his mind, but he knows he's wrong. And how often we do that? We try to tell God what's up. We're going to tell him how things are going to play out or how he's going to do things. And we're wrong every time when we're telling God how he's going to do something. So then this is God's reply to him. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. In this verse, I'm going to come back to probably a couple times, because this is, I think, is the main message of the book. It ties in really well with the very end of Habakkuk. Whereas, yes, there's judgment coming because they're a fallen nation, just like our nation is a fallen nation. We're turning far away from God as time goes on. And there's a promised judgment because God, as Habakkuk mentioned, doesn't look on evil and lets it prosper. So there will be judgment, but he's letting it tarry. He's telling Habakkuk, write it down and write it plain. He wants us to understand because we're dumb. He wants it to be simple so that anybody can pick it up and understand what God's trying to say. And he says that whoever reads it may run so that they can tell the next person, that they can see what's going to happen, and they can run to other people and be like, hey, you need to read this. And he says that the judgment's going to tarry because the longer it tarries, the longer we have to repent. And that's what's happening right now. God could have just let the world burn thousands of years ago. He didn't have to come back a second time if he didn't feel like it. He could have just dealt with it the first time. Been like, nah, you guys are way too far, and we're done. But he doesn't. He's given us thousands of years to find the way that he's provided for us. But he says it will tarry, but it will also not tarry long. It will come, and judgment will happen. And he continues and says, indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home because he enlarges his desire as hell. He is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers himself all nations and heaps up for himself all peoples. So the Bible speaks a lot against pride and greed. I think these are two of the main things God judges instantly. A lot of the things he lets pan out, and we often get judged by our own mistakes, but he doesn't let pride and greed pass. And he sees this in the people, that they they have this pride and greed. And those aren't godly things, obviously. Those are very specifically things that turn us away from God. Pride means God's not involved. We have pride in something other than God. Or greed, well, that's self-explanatory. Greed is greed. So he's going to judge him for this. And we see the kind of judgment he makes on Nebuchadnezzar later on in the time frame, is that Nebuchadnezzar had pride and greed, and God made him like a cow in the fields for 7 years, Cameron? Yeah, there you go. My memory. It's great. And then continuing, verse 6. No, that impresses me. I can't remember anything. So it says, we will not all these things take up a proverb against them, and a taunting riddle against them, and say, woe to him who increases what is not his. How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awake who oppress you? And you will become their booty. Because you have plundered many nations, and all the remnant of the people shall plunder you, because men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. So God is accusing Habakkuk's nation, the nation of Judah, of the very same thing that he accused of the Babylonians. It's the same exact thing. He says the Babylonians are evil people because they're just conquering nations, taking whatever they want. And God's saying, you conquered nations. You took what you wanted, and you've risen up with this pride and greed over it. He's saying, just as you have plundered many nations, those nations will plunder you. And we see when that happens, when the Babylonians come, they take everything. They destroy the city, they take all the people, and there's nothing left. After the Babylonian invasion, and one of the prophets goes back to Jerusalem, they have to rebuild the whole thing, because the whole thing was destroyed. So then he continues and says, woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give him shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples and sins against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timber will answer it. So these people, often you see a lot of the times, the king or the general, the person in power, when disaster is happening, is usually somewhere safe. Is usually hiding up in their tower or behind their big walls. And so he thinks those things are going to save him. But God is saying that the timber will cry out, and the stones will also cry out. Because even like the natural things of the world, stones and wood, fear God more than anything else. And if they're hiding behind the walls or hiding behind their big towers, even the construction of the building or the wall will serve God before they serve the person hiding behind it. And they won't be safe from this destruction that God is bringing. And this is what we're waiting for. At least I'm waiting for, right? Is when God is going to come back and judge. But it's also something to not be waiting for, I guess. In a way, it's very convoluted. Whereas like we're excited for the end, and we really want to be done. But also there are people who aren't ready for that time to come. So then 12, he says, woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people labor to feed the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you look on his nakedness, and you are filled with the shame instead of glory. You also drink, and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid because of men's blood, and the violence of the land, and the city of all who dwell in it. So as he's continuing, it's just another way to say that God's judgment is coming. And the Lord will judge evil because he doesn't look upon it and let it prosper, as Habakkuk has pointed out. What profit is the image that its maker should carve it? In the molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols. Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him. So they've trusted in their idols. And I found this verse that is in Psalms that is somewhat amusing, the way God thinks about these idols. And he compares the people to it. It's in Psalm 115, verse 4 through 8. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak. Eyes they have, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. Noses they have, but they do not smell. They have hands, but they do not handle. Feet they have, but they do not walk. Nor do they mutter through their throat. Those who make them are like them. So is everyone who trusts in them. So they trust in these things. And it's easy to explain why a wooden image is not going to save you. It can't do anything. It can't speak. It can't help you. But God's comparing the people to the images that they serve. If you're as useless as that image, you're not going to be able to do anything. They can't save themselves, and neither can their image save them. So then Habakkuk is going to respond here. And we've seen that he disagrees with what God's doing. He starts with saying this nation needs to be judged, and God says, this is how I'm going to judge it. And it's not how Habakkuk wants. You don't want to see your enemy raised up. And you definitely don't want to see your enemy defeat you. I mean, he probably wants the nation to be punished in any other way than the Babylonians. It's a little bit embarrassing, really. But he prays again in chapter 3. He says, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Siganoth. It's probably wrong, but gave it a shot. O Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. And this is the good thing about the God that we serve, is we know he's a merciful God. And Habakkuk understands this. And being told that the Babylonians are going to conquer you is a death sentence to everybody in the nation that's going to be conquered, because the Babylonians were known to not leave people. They would just wipe everybody out. Wipe the city out, wipe the animals out, wipe the people out. So he's saying, in wrath, remember mercy. And then it continues to say, God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Before him went pestilence, and fever followed at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations, and the everlasting mountain were shattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian trembled. This is Revelation type stuff. Like when you're reading through Revelation, we see the exact same things. And this is God's power. We've seen him go on about the Babylonians' power. You're like, oh, they're a terrible nation, and this is what they're going to do, and they're so powerful. But this is God's power. It says that just by the presence of God, that the nations are startled, that the mountains were scattered, the hills bowed, and the tents of Cushan were in affliction. We're looking at like catastrophic world events happening just because God's presence is there. So he's realized the power coming against them, Babylon, but he also realizes the power with him, God. So he knows that there will be mercy. And continuing on in verse 8, O Lord, you were displeased with the rivers. Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea that you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made quite ready, oaths sworn over your arrows. You divided the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and trembled. The overflowing of water passed by, the deep utterance of its voice, and lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of your arrows they went, at the shining of your glittering spear. You marched through the land in indignation. You trampled the nations in anger. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. This word indignation, I don't have the Greek word for you. I couldn't say it if I had it anyway. But I did look into this word, and the nice thing about studying in the Greek and Hebrew is they have a much better language than we do. Indignation comes up, if you're just reading through the New King James, all over the place. But if you look at the Greek word behind indignation, it doesn't come up all over the place. It comes up here in Habakkuk, and it comes up in Revelation. Those are the two places this kind of judgment is mentioned, are those two places. So we're comparing what God can do here to what God can do in Revelation. That's a big word. But we need to focus on verse 13, is you went forth for the salvation of your people, the salvation with your anointed. So God's coming with judgment, but that's not for the loss of hope. Us as Christians, we know God's coming with judgment, but we're not afraid because God is coming for our salvation. He's coming for the judgment of basically everything against us as Christians. He's here to judge evil. It's not like the Babylonians coming who were there to destroy everything. But we have a God that can do everything between 4 and 11, all these amazing things. He's coming on our behalf. It says, you struck the head of the house of the wicked by laying bare the foundation to neck. You thrust through with his own arrows the head of its villages. They came out like a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was like a feasting on the poor in secret. You walked through the sea with your horses, through a heap of great waters. When I heard, my body trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he comes up to the people, he will invade them with his troops. So it's still a terrifying thing. And I think that's part of the reason I would stand by pre-trib rapture, is it's going to be so terrible that even Habakkuk, knowing he's not going to be there for it, he's saying that he prays that he'd be in rest when this time comes. He doesn't want to be there for it because it's going to be so great a judgment. And then finishing up this last chapter, though the fig tree may not blossom, fruit be on the vines, through labor of the olive may fail, yield no fruit. Is that good? Okay. Though the flock may be cut off from the fold, yet there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. This joy is because this judgment is protection. And the interesting thing about this last bit is it's actually pretty much prophecy. I don't know if that's what it's intended there for. But if you look at the judgment that comes to Judah through Babylon, they take everybody, and they tried to leave people behind for an odd reason. They were known for just wiping people out. But when they took Judah, they left some people in the land basically to be farmers. They left people there to cultivate the fields and use that to bring more resources to Babylon. But between the famines that they got and basically the people going on strike there was no prosper in the land, and they ended up just taking everybody back to Babylon because there was nothing happening there. The fields weren't producing fruit, and the fields, there was no grain, there was nothing. There's a bit of prophecy there, I think. But he's still rejoicing. He's seeing basically a vision of the destruction of his own people, and he doesn't know what's going on. It's kind of like Job not being able to read the first chapter of Job. He just had to go through everything else. Is that Habakkuk doesn't see the end. He doesn't know that the people of Judah prosper to the end, and they go back to Jerusalem and they rebuild the place, and God raises his people back up. But he has that faith. He knows his God. He knows that he's a just and righteous God, and that the judgment coming won't be on the righteous, that it'll only be on the wicked. And it says, the Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on high hills. To the chief musician with my stringed instruments. That's basically straight out of Psalms. David, who probably knew God better than most, better than I do. He had a very, very good relationship with God, something that like everyone should strive for. And that's what he would say about his God. And Habakkuk understood this. And I want to go back to where we were. I told you I'd go back there. Is chapter 2. Because I think this is the main point. Because why do we have the books? Why do we have the minor prophets? Why do we need to know all this happened? And it says that he wrote down this burden, and God explains that it's for the people to read. And I think we have it to compare to what is happening. This is the book right here that God told everybody throughout, whoever wrote this thing, write it down, because I need you to read it so that you can run and tell other people about it, so that they may read it and they may run and tell other people about it, because there's hope in this book. There's judgment coming. It's a terrible judgment coming on the wicked. Everything's going to be wiped out that's wicked. And the only way out is provided, though. God gave us a way out. He paid the price for us, and he told us all of this. So he's told us of the judgment, and he's told us of the way out, and he wrote it down for us because he wants us to take this book and he wants us to tell everybody about it. And he's tarrying, just like he did here. He tarried a couple years. We have, I think, 2 more kings in the end of 2 Kings that happened before the invasion of Babylon, from when Habakkuk is written to when it actually happens, because he's tarrying, because he does take people out of Babylon. He holds them close and protects them. We have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego protected in a fire, and he held them close through multiple trials. We have Daniel in a lion's den, protected from the lions, because they were his people. They were righteous. And God will do the same for us. There's going to be many trials, and there will be a judgment. But God has given us hope, and he's going to carry us through all of that. And all that he asks in return is our repentance, and to turn to him and to tell people about him. That's our one job. Otherwise, we become Christians, and God would be like, oh, come with me. As soon as you're a Christian, there's a reason God leaves us behind. It's because he wrote a book for us to tell other people about. So as a Christian, that's our job, and we need to be fulfilling that job. And especially now that, everyone's been saying this for a while, but I think we're pretty close. So we need to be telling people about this book and about the hope that he has guaranteed us. So that's it to close the book of Habakkuk. That was just about 60 verses. Sorry you had to sit there through it. But it's wonderful to read through. It has a lot of hope. And I was hearing a pastor once say, and it's interesting to think about, because you don't think about hate in this way. But he says, how much do you need to hate somebody to see them walk past you and know about this judgment and know that there is a way out? How much do you have to hate them to not tell them that? To just let them go on their way and just receive that judgment, knowing that that's happening. So with our command is to love people. That means tell them about the hope that there is. So you want me to close in prayer, or you want to close in prayer, Cameron? All right. Dear Lord, I pray that that this message inspires us to take what we've read, to take the hope that you've given us, to have that hope for ourselves, and then to spread that hope, to have this burden that we know the judgment coming, and we want to tell people about the hope that you've provided for us. I pray that we just use this time that you're tarrying before the judgment comes, that we use it to share with as many people as possible, because your love for us is that none shall perish, and you've tasked us with the job of reducing those numbers. I pray that you just bless everyone, and that you just give us a relaxing Sunday, relaxing in the Sabbath that you gave us, of just resting in the hope that you've given us. Amen. Oh.